The McCall Trailblazer Award and the McCall Racial Justice and Leadership Initiative are named after Reverend Dr. Emmanuel McCall, who's a long-standing pastor, educator, and a racial justice trailblazer. The Emmanuel McCall Racial Justice and Leadership Initiative seeks to create avenues for meaningful unity and justice between racially diverse communities. The McCall Trailblazer Award exists to recognize CBF individuals and ministries who charter through unequal and unjust areas of life and initiate proactive resolutions for communities in the form of policies or practices, resulting in greater equity, opportunity, impact, and outcomes for all. The Pan-African Koinonia Steering Committee of CBF chose to recognize 3 individual recipients for the 2021 McCall Racial Justice Trailblazer Award in recognition for their faithful service to the cause of racial justice. The CBF Conversation today is with honoree the Reverend Dr. Preston Clegg, who is the senior pastor of Second Baptist Church in Little Rock, Arkansas. The church holds a history of being justice-oriented dating back to 1957, when it called for the integration of the church and Little Rock Central High School. Dr. Clegg has continued this legacy by forming the church's racial justice statement, hosting social justice events, and teaching and preaching about racial justice. Dr. Clegg was one of a few white pastors to openly criticize the state for its racial bias in education and to take a stand by calling for the dismantling of systemic racism. Welcome and congratulations, Preston. I'm so honored to have this conversation with you today. And let's go ahead and get started. And let's hear more about your work personally. If you would take us back in 2018 and tell us about your journey on your sabbatical.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Kasey. I'm more honored to be with you and to be an awardee of the McCall Award. It means the world to me. So in 2018, I was eligible for a sabbatical because my church is gracious in that way. And the year before, I began thinking about what I wanted to study. And I had some movements of the Spirit in my soul, if I can sound like a preacher for a second. Really, it was questions I could not answer as a pastor. As a pastor of a white church, a white pastor of a predominantly white church. Second, has a history of racial justice work, as you just described, and yet I felt like there were ways that we could continue that and mature that work. And so it really was born of questions that I was wrestling with as the pastor of this church. You know, I never set out to be someone speaking at state capitals and marching in the streets. I set out to try to be a good pastor, is really what I was trying to do. The questions I could not answer as the pastor of this church were questions like, if everybody in the church thinks that racism is evil and a sin, why do we keep doing it? And if we're going to recognize that racism isn't just interpersonal animus of evil people, but injustice embedded in the systems of this country, then how do I teach my people to think systemically? How do I give my people the tools to spot that sort of racism and act on it, as our faith compels us to do? How do I teach my people that justice work is not an addendum to the gospel? It's not an add-on. It's not like the gravy on top, but it's part of the biscuit, you know? Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly. You know, that's not a woke talking head on television who said that. That was Micah who said that. So really, those were the questions that gave rise to my sabbatical. How do I teach people to think systemically, and in particular, to spot systemic racism at work? How do I teach people to reorient their brains to think when they hear the word racism, not vile people doing evil things, but good people allowing systems to perpetuate in our silence? And how do I help people to heal what is so difficult to spot and name? for white people. So for this sabbatical, I had 13 weeks off. I had a Lilly grant for which I'm most grateful. I felt like it was layers and layers of blessings that made this possible for me. And I'll say this as well. Before I could teach my people how to answer those questions, I had to wrestle with those questions. And I had to do my own homework that my formal education really did not prepare me for. And I don't say that to slam anyone. I think that's part of how systemic racism works, is it partially educates us. And so I had to go really do my own education in terms of racial justice and systemic racism. I tried to be a student of Black voices. I tried to listen to theologians that I had not previously listened to, practitioners that I had too long neglected. And so for 13 weeks, I studied the social gospel and systemic racism. I did a civil rights tour of the South to help me learn my history. And that challenged me and encouraged me all at the same time. And that sabbatical really profoundly changed me. Even as it renewed my soul, it challenged my mind and my soul and my spirit. And I think my church would say it changed the whole church as well. So it was a great gift and a great challenge all at the same time.
Are there any particular Black voices that stood out for you that were meaningful for you?
Yes, Howard Thurman. I have come to think that Howard Thurman is the most seminal theologian in U.S. history. I also think he's the most overlooked. And the way that his writing works both in the depths of your soul, he's a mystic. He challenges people in the most intimately personal ways. And he also can speak to how systems work. And the way he moves back and forth between the depths of souls and the breadth of systems, I just see profound wisdom in that. And I think the white church could learn so much from that. So he was and is the first person that comes to mind in terms of listening to voices that I had too long neglected. I had not read Howard Thurman before my sabbatical.
Wow, okay.
And I think that's close to a sin.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and sharing the beginning of a new journey for you and your church. You know, part of the awarding process is that nominations are submitted on behalf of the recipients. And part of what's included in that is what the nominees know about your journey, and we call it we ask for a racial justice resume. And in that, what's interesting, and we ask for references, for at least 3 references from folks who have been either working with you or impacted by your work. And one of the things that seems to be a common thread as your resume was being read and your references were also being read is that you seem to have a good balance, or at least how things read is that this has been a heart journey for you and not just a head journey, as well as activism. Because usually people say, you know, it's a heart issue. You've got to deal with the heart first before you do any work. Or they say, you know, you gotta just get in there and do it, and not necessarily. I'll say it this way: I've talked to a number of pastors who are working with congregations, and their membership's okay with the church being involved and being active in the community, but there's a challenge when they're pushed to reflect on themselves and their home and their family life, right?
Right. That's
and
right.
So it's interesting as going over your application is that a number of the references who happen to be Black call you friend as well as colleague in this journey. And so tell us a little bit about your relationship with the first democratically elected Black mayor of Little Rock, Mayor Frank Scott, and your invitation to participate in his inauguration.
I met Frank through a mutual friend before he was running for office as mayor of Little Rock. And Frank is an associate pastor here in town. And so we became friends several years ago. I found Frank to be a person of great integrity and wisdom. I have not hesitated to lean on him and to trust his eyes and ears, and he the same with me. And so when he ran for office of mayor of Little Rock, I was so enthusiastic and excited about that. He is the first democratically elected mayor of our city. The board has appointed other black mayors in our history upon the death or resignation of other mayors, but Frank is the first democratically elected mayor of our city. And so when he won, it wasn't a normal election. It had the ring of holiness to it, that the Spirit was afoot. And I don't mean that in a partisan, my candidate won kind of way. I mean, it felt like a new day had dawned in our city kind of way. He invited me to offer sort of the Benedictine prayer of his inauguration. And there were thousands of people there in the Robinson Auditorium, and just a spirit of celebration and exuberance. And all I did was pray. That's what's so strange to me, is it felt like a normal prayer, but it was not a normal prayer. The Spirit moved in that room, and I don't say that flippantly, but it was one of the few times in my life that I really felt like I was participating in something larger than me. The room erupted in gratitude and joy, and I just knew the Spirit was at work. And so it is a moment that I will go to my grave with, and it bonded Frank and I even more closely. But I want to double back to one more thing you said before you asked the question as well. That moment was a pinnacle moment in my life, not just my ministry, not just my time in Little Rock. It was a pinnacle moment of my life. But there were a lot of little moments that led up to that, right? I probably wouldn't care so much about what's happening with the leadership in Little Rock if Frank wasn't a good friend of mine. I'm relationally invested with Frank. And we've been through a lot together as friends, and we have a lot of mutual friends that have been through a lot. And so it's not just those pinnacle moments. It's all the little coffees and lunches and texts along the way that build and strengthen those relationships. It's a willingness to listen and grow so that when that pinnacle moment comes, it's not so much that you create that moment anew, but that moment reveals what has long been being built, right? You inch your way to those sorts of moments. You don't leap your way to those moments.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. You know, I just want to read the quote, a couple of quotes from the mayor. He says, while Preston and I could have certainly bonded over our shared profession, it was a mutual commitment to social justice and racial equity that fused our friendship. When I took the oath of office in January 1, 2019, I asked Preston to deliver the benediction for the ceremony. It was a rousing, clarion call, which unflinchingly looked at Little Rock's past and present when it comes to issues of race and equity. But it also offered a path forward. His message truly resonated with over 2,000 people who were present at the ceremony. So thank you for being led by the Spirit and saying yes to that call to pray, and saying yes to the Spirit to use your voice in that time. He also goes on, he says, whether it is race, education, services for persons who are experiencing homelessness, food insecurity, or many other social issues facing us, Preston Clegg truly lives out the message of Matthew 25:40. And what's interesting about that is, again, to see the parallels, because we have something similar from Jamar Tisby, the author Jamar Tisby, who also was one of your references for your nomination. And he says one of the
Right.
qualities I appreciate most about Preston is his willingness to take a definite stance on the side of justice, even when such public declaration run the risk of causing controversy. In the words of John
Mhm.
Lewis, he is not afraid to get into good trouble. And so,
Mm.
in particular, he talks about the Little Rock school districts face some extremely contentious political differences, and Preston stood with parents and kids in that debate. Can you tell us about that advocacy work you did for the education system in Little Rock?
Yes. Um, I think most people, when they think of the city of Little Rock, think about 1957. And I think there is this, I think in some ways, my city is haunted uh, by our history. And one of my goals as the pastor of the church and whatever sort of leader I am in this community is to help my city tell the truth about our history, but also tell it in such a way that it leads us to a more hopeful and joyful future. That future is not around our history, it's through our history. Um, some of my advocacy has been born of the ministry of Second Baptist Church. And that's something that I would say to any, especially a white pastor listening to this conversation, is maybe your best way to start with racial justice advocacy is with what it is you're doing in that moment. What is your church doing? My church has had an active ministry in a downtown elementary school, Martin Luther King Elementary. It's a few blocks away from the church. We do grade level reading work in that school. So, how can we go do remedial work with vulnerable children in that school and be silent when policies are passed that have a disparate impact on the children of that school? For me, justice advocacy and pastoral ministry are not opposites. That's not how I function. For me, they are differing sides of the same coin. If I visit people in the hospital to provide pastoral care, which I do, I also want to be sure that my people have access to good health care. If we're going to care for the homeless, which we do, I also want to support policies that create fewer homeless people. It's the same way with racial justice work. If we're going to have ministry in a local, and it is a predominantly black and brown elementary school, how can we be silent about things that matter? So the Little Rock School District was taken over by the state several years ago. I lose track of how many now. I want to say 5 to 6 years ago. And the state actually retained control of the district longer than the laws permitted. And they were proposing policies that had a disparate impact on schools in black and brown neighborhoods in Little Rock. This is a perfect example of how um, racism works not with bad people acting, right? But it works when churches are silent. And this was an instance in which I felt like I could not, in good conscience, say that I was anti racist and be silent about this matter. So we had a movement at Central High School. So think about that history. A little over half a century later, we had a vigil on the grounds at Central High at which I spoke, and several other faith leaders spoke. It was interfaith and partners all over the city. And we just asked our officials to be more just in what they were doing. And we had some success and some failure with that. Not everything happened that I asked to happen, but some did. And so we're grateful for the gains and striving for even more so. There's one other thing that I would say in this regard, too. If you're a pastor of a white church and you feel like your congregation might bristle at this sort of work, this would be my advice to you. I think racism is the original sin of our country, and it is the injustice that underlies so many other injustices. So if you don't want to squarely address racism, address educational disparities, address income disparities, address homelessness and mental health and healthcare disparities. Because as you address those other disparities, you are, whether you realize it or not, addressing racism because it underlies all those other issues. So this was an education issue. It was also a race issue at the same time, because I think all of those injustices are intrinsically racial injustices.
Now, is that something that you discovered on the road in terms of those connections and framing that way to enter into the work, or is that something you knew going into it? You understand?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
I've always thought racism was the original sin, but that's only been confirmed as I've done my research and tried to do this work in the community. Mm-hmm. All of these issues are racial issues if we're only honest enough to admit that.
Fabulous. Thank you. So I want to also go to your third reference from Regina Favors. And she says she was the interim president of Arkansas Baptist College, which is an historical Black college in Little Rock. She said, Dr. Clegg was one of the first ministers who reached out to me to be a resource in support of the college. He worked with me and the leadership team of the college to form a committee of other ministers in the community and other community leaders to see how he could help how he could help in resolving racial injustice, and specifically suggested that we start first with having a conversation, which you had mentioned before. It's those little steps of getting started. Right. So I have there's a follow-up question I have about some of the economic work you're doing in terms of entrepreneurship. But before we go there, tell me, you reached out to her directly, but you also brought some folks along with you. Tell us about that. Why? In the conversations. Yeah.
Yeah. Several whys. Number one, I can't teach my congregation everything they need to know about racial justice. I'm not smart enough. I don't have that experience. And so I need other teachers. I need other teachers personally, and I need other teachers of my congregation. And I would encourage other pastors to scan your community and find the voices that your people need to be listening to. But also, I don't think Second Baptist can do this work by ourselves. I think we need other community leaders to do the work. And so at all times, I'm trying to build coalitions and figure out who's in this with us. And really, everyone that you've mentioned today, from the mayor to Jamar Tisby, who has been a guide and gracious friend to me, to President Favors at Arkansas Baptist College. All of them have been friends on normal Tuesday mornings, not just racial justice work out in the streets, right? And I think we all know we're in this together. So that's the why. I can't do this work by myself. I can't even do it inside the four walls of my church by myself. One of the things that we did with Arkansas Baptist College, I don't believe that racial justice work is anywhere near complete until money begins to change hands. And one of the things that we thought and prayed over as a church last year was how we as a congregation could act on that in a fiscal way and put our money where our preaching is. And we reached out to Arkansas Baptist College, with whom we've had a long relationship, and we established a fund for young Black entrepreneurs, graduates or students of Arkansas Baptist College who want to start their own businesses. And we essentially left the fund with Arkansas Baptist College to structure as they see fit, and to give the grants and loans to who they see fit. So we're just about to offer our first round of loans, and I cannot be more excited. I could not be more excited to see who those bless and to learn their stories. And yeah, it was just an effort for us to elevate the profile of Arkansas Baptist College, to seek to bless them, and to do really in-house justice work. How can we give in such a way that makes the world a little more just and equitable?
Yeah. Fabulous. I look forward to hearing too about the investments you're making in Black entrepreneurship. And so, yeah, I'm excited to hear how that turns out and what comes about. But you also partnered with Arkansas Baptist College with a conversation series too called Race in the Rock. Can you? And that
Yes,
actually preceded the entrepreneurship grant. Is that correct?
it did, yes. And, Race in the Rock brings a lot of these voices full circle. Jamar Tisby was my co conspirator in many ways with Race in the Rock. We dreamed that together. And really, what this was a semester long effort to help the people of Little Rock, and not just our church, but the people of our city, to learn our history, to be honest about our present, and to dream a bit about our future. So the first, we met on Wednesday nights, a semester of Wednesday nights, and we alternated between the sanctuary of Second Baptist and the auditorium at Arkansas Baptist College. We wanted to alternate between predominantly white and predominantly black spaces. And we had guest speakers along the way. In September, I think this was the fall of 2019, maybe. In September, Jamar Tisby led us on the history of racism in this country, and in particular, religiously oriented racism. I would commend his book to any listeners, The Color of Compromise. And so he set the stage historically for how we as a country and church arrived at where we are. In October, we began to study more present day issues in our city. We talked to the mayor about what was happening in our city in terms of equity. We talked to Senator Joyce Elliott, who does a lot of work in terms of education. And by the way, the Central High Vigil that we just talked about happened that month as we were talking about present day issues in Race in the Rock. Again, I didn't dream or think that up. I'm not smart enough to do that. That was the providence of God who brought up that moment precisely when city leaders in my church are talking about schools. And then in November, we had ministry partners come and we dreamed a little. What might racial justice look like in our city? And so you're exactly right. This work with Arkansas Baptist College grew out of some of that truth telling about the past and the present, and also some of that hopeful dreaming. I don't think we do that enough. This gift from the church to Arkansas Baptist College was born of dreams and imagination. And so, yes, Race in the Rock was a huge gift to us, both as a church and I would hope to say as a city. And I hope good work will continue to unfold out of that effort.
Um, so 2020 was a year like no other,
Yes,
with the global pandemic
absolutely.
that took place, and then the social unrest that
Mm-hmm.
that took place, with
Mm-hmm.
all. I'll just leave it at that. That took place, and
Yeah.
so tell us a little bit more about your role, or how you were led to stand for justice, or participate in addressing or answering or responding to what was taking place in 2020.
Yes. Yeah. Um, so just to get the chronology right for everyone, I did a sabbatical on racial justice in 2018. We did Race in the Rock in 2019, and then 2020, just as you described. And I feel like God had been stepping us in this direction slowly but singularly. And so, with the murder of George Floyd and all the fallout, not only that, so many other things we could talk about, I felt like this was a time not just for second to be loud. I felt like we had been loud, but I felt like this was a moment to be clear. And here's what I mean by that. I kept hearing white people of goodwill, I believe them to be white people of goodwill, say things like, I want racism to be over, I just don't know how. What can we do? We've studied, I don't need more data. How can we end this, right? And so I met with the deacons of the church, which was a challenge because we were in the middle of the pandemic, just as you said. And I just spoke from my heart to them that I felt like this was a time for us as a church to be clear about policy issues. Some of them local and city issues, some of them state level issues, and some of them national level issues. That we as a church were going to be clear in these different avenues of racial justice, education, community safety, criminal justice. In all of those ways, we wanted to advocate and act on a more equitable world. And so we had specific policy asks in this document. We voted on it as a congregation, and then we published it on all of our social media platforms, and we've used it to do advocacy for specific asks for local and state legislators. Just for one example, and for me this is a fairly egregious example, Arkansas still practices the death penalty in this state. And I'm opposed to the death penalty for convictional faith reasons. I'm also opposed to the death penalty because of the racial disparity of how it is practiced in this country and in this state. And so again, how can I say I'm anti-racist and be quiet when we are doing something and supporting something or being complicit in something that has such a deadly and disparate impact on people of color? I cannot and I will not. So our church passed a racial justice statement, and what made this unique, at least in my mind, is we tried to take the next step and have specific policy asks to make it clear for people how we can take the next step in terms of racial justice. That was the hope and the goal for which we're continuing to strive and do this work.
Fabulous. So, again, your nomination application that was submitted on your behalf continues, tells about the heart, that this is a heart conviction issue for you, that it's clear in our conversation that there are, it's a biblical issue for you, right? A gospel issue for you. And that you're motivated not just for a transformation, a change of heart and mind, but also of community. And so tell us with which you have started, or what was ignited in 2018 with your sabbatical, that started because the questions and the answers you were seeking and the motivation that you achieved, I guess is the right word for that, that inspired these actions for you and your congregation in the community. Tell us how that's impacted, or whether or not it's impacted who you are now as Second Baptist Little Rock and your current ministry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this work has challenged me at every level of my being. It's made me unthink some things I used to think and can no longer think. But it's also challenged my church. But I would say it's challenged my church in holy ways. And it's challenged us Christward. not away from Christ. It's challenged us Christward. It's helped us read the Scriptures more faithfully. It's helped us see the world more clearly. It's helped us pray for people around our city that we used to not know, and neighborhoods that used to be off of our radar. So it has challenged our church. I believe that we have lost some people along the way who thought we were misguided or wrongheaded in the way that we were doing this. But I will also say this: we have gained some families who came to our church during the pandemic specifically, saying to me things like, my former church had nothing to say in the summer of 2020 about racial justice, and I could not in good conscience stay there any longer. Or people who have found second saying, this is a church that cares about racial justice and sees it as you just said, intrinsically part of gospel work, not something peripheral to gospel work. And I've always believed that. It's where following Jesus has led me. I want to be a part of that work too. And even for people who have not formally joined Second, we have more partners around this city and around Central Arkansas than we used to have, who are doing this work in their own unique ways, have been doing it long before we ever thought about it, have been doing it better than we've done it, and would now call us friends in this work and friends in ministry. And that is beautiful and sacred to observe as well. Second was a great church long before I got here. And Second was doing this work long before I got here. But I think a renewed emphasis in this season, this social context, it's been a new challenge because of the complexities of our day, but it's also breathed new life into our church and our work in ways that I never imagined or planned. And so, yes, the challenges are real, but I would say yes to them 1,000,000 times over because of what I've seen and heard that has grown out of this work.
Thank you. So my final question, and you've kind of touched upon it kind of consistently, but I'm just going to ask directly to you. If someone who's listening to this conversation has been felt a call or a restlessness to be involved in racial justice work, but not sure how to get started or even fearful of getting started, what would you recommend or what would you say to them?
Yeah, a few thoughts, and these are about as fundamental as this work gets, at least in the way that I frame it. Number one, I would encourage anyone listening to, when you read in the biblical text and you come across the word justice, or in the New Testament, when you come across the word justice or righteousness, which can be translated either way, I think you should pause and dive as deeply as you can into the text and into your soul at precisely that moment. Because we have to form new neural grooves in the way that we think about this work. It is not, it's not like a layer upon our Bible reading. It is in the Scripture. It is embedded in the Scripture. It is at the core of our faith. It is intrinsic to the work of the God who made all people in God's image. And until we think of it at that fundamental level, I think we'll have reservations about the work. Secondly, and you've said this even in your comments today, I do think we have to get to a place where this becomes personal for us. I don't think we lack data. And this is coming from someone who's tried to do a lot of education work. I've already talked about it, my own work and the education work of my people. But you come to a place where one more book club book doesn't exactly move the needle for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, there comes a place where your own skin, and I mean that in all the levels of that word, your own skin has to get in the game. And until we weep, until we mourn, until we lament, until we are willing to make peace and not just keep peace, until our unity is God's big unity of black, white, brown, and everything in between, and not just the little unities of our congregations, until it becomes personal in those ways, I think we will not do this work well or for long. And the final thing I would say is, I think white people and white ministers in particular need to be in a posture of listening. There's definitely a time for us to speak, and when that time comes, I hope we speak. But we won't know what to say, and we won't know when those times come or are before us until we've done a good job of listening to the black experience in this country, listening to how policy nuances impact one neighborhood more than another neighborhood. So have a posture of humble listening is what I would encourage people who are interested in this work to do.
Thank you so much, Preston. I so appreciate this time. I was so looking forward to our conversation. Yeah. I thank you for your insight.
Absolutely.
I thank you for your ministry and your answering the call to justice. And I think what you said is a fine way to close our conversation today. So, and we will share information if there are folks who want to continue to contribute and support what you're doing with Arkansas Baptist College. And we'll end our conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be a part of this.